I thought yesterday's vote by the House was disgraceful.
Nancy Pelosi had struggled to contain the fallout from comments made by the freshman lawmaker, Democrat Ilhan Omar.
I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country.
She said things about Jews buying friends and influence on Israeli issues.
Israel has hypnotized the world, and saying U.S. politicians support Israel because it's all about the Benjamins, baby.
You going to apologize?
But I do not believe that she understood the full weight of the words.
She comes from a different culture. She has things to learn.
I think she has a different experience in the use of words, doesn't understand that some of them are fraught with meaning that she didn't realize.
That being said, I do believe that it is fair for us to engage in a real conversation and debate around special interests, influence on U.S. foreign policy. I think it is appropriate for the Congress and for a member of Congress to talk about foreign policy in the U.S. relationship with other countries.
Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party. And I thought that vote was a disgrace. And so does everybody else. If you get an honest answer. If you get an honest answer from politicians, they thought it was a disgrace.
Never wait for an invitation or ask permission to step into your power. I don't just want a seat at the table. I want the best seat at the table. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I could respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
That
was not a question. I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes, sir.
Highly respected man and a very highly respected judge. The judge said there was no collusion with Russia. This had nothing to do with collusion. There was no collusion.
So that was President Trump from the White House yesterday, dramatically misrepresenting Judge T.S. Ellis's remarks at Paul Manafort's sentencing. The president also tweeted something similar, that the judge stated loudly and for the world to hear that there was no collusion with Russia. Well, what the judge actually said is that Manafort was not before this court for anything having to do with collusion with the Russian government to influence this election, not that there was no collusion. So that's just false. And this is turning out to be a banner year for the president's false and misleading statements.
Year after year, countless Americans are murdered by criminal, illegal aliens. That's where they put in the names. They put it in a lottery. And you pick, oh, here's a wonderful person, wonderful. You know, he killed 4 people. They send us the people they don't want. I don't know if you noticed, but deficits seem to be coming down. And last month it was reported, and everybody was surprised, but I wasn't surprised. We have launched an unprecedented economic boom. When the wind stops blowing, that's the end of your electric. Robert Mueller put 13 of the angriest Democrats in the history of our country on the commission.
According to the Washington Post fact checker, President Trump has now made 9,014 false or misleading claims in his first 773 days in office. 9,014. Now listen, when we started highlighting the tally of the president's bunk claims on this show more than a year ago, I searched for a way to make something conceptual like a false statement visual. And I landed on a version of a kid's game, guessing the number of gumballs in a jar. And it worked. So ever since, I've used jars of gumballs to show you this. Now, up to this point, we just bring the jars down from my office, sit them on a table, show you the latest tally, and that was it. Well, now there are so many jars and so many gumballs that they need their own storage closet. And sitting them side by side on a table isn't going to work anymore.
This past week, the long list of Trump administration efforts that have been shot down by federal judges got a new addition. D.C. Federal Judge Tanya Chutkan ruled on Thursday that the Education Department's decision to delay the implementation of a rule demanding school districts address racial disparities was arbitrary and capricious and must be reversed immediately. Although there's no immediate word as to the consequences, she further ruled that the department broke the law because of the absence of a reasoned explanation for their lingering delay. The rule had been set in motion at the end of the Obama administration, but its more than 2-year delay ended up as one of the most significant policy moves to date from Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, as the New York Times put it. Imagine being defined by opposition to a measure combating minority groups' disadvantage that someone else had tried to implement. It's not even as though they simply turned a blind eye, they actively worked against students whose positions the Obama team had been trying to elevate. The binding rule in question requires states to look for possible, significant disproportionality among students of various races who are in special education programs, otherwise in non-traditional, restrictive classroom settings, and/or disciplined. Subsequently, school districts where the gaps are discovered are required under the measure to appropriately fix the disparities, setting aside 15% of their federal funding for the task. The Education Department had claimed while the rule was still in limbo that they were concerned about the emergence of racial quotas, ignoring the specific prohibition against the adoption of such a system in the original rule. They also ignored the fact that economic conditions and even personal bias have long ensured that some form of those quotas were in place, specifically claiming that disparities did not necessarily represent some deeper ill. The real question is simply whether or not the system will be bent to help those left behind. The Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates Executive Director Denise Marshall praised Chutkan's ruling, asserting, "The court has sided with the children whom the department had deemed unimportant through its actions. This case is not the first in which DeVos has sided against certain groups of students." Late last year, the Education Department unveiled proposed new rules governing UAL harassment and assault on college campuses, severely limiting the definition of harassment to only include cases where the behavior effectively denies a person equal access to the school's education program or activity. They went further, even allowing an alleged harasser or assaulter to question their accuser, although it would be completed through an intermediary under the provision.